The blade was already in the air, before anyone in that hall noticed I had moved. It stopped a hand's width from the queen's throat, caught between my two fingers, and the chamber went completely silent. Nobody breathed. The assassin who had thrown it stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, his mouth slightly open, staring at me, like he had just seen something that broke the rules of the universe he thought he understood. I did not say a word. I simply looked at him. He turned around and walked out of the hall. Not ran, walked, slowly, carefully, like a man trying not to wake something sleeping nearby. Nobody stopped him. Nobody chased him. The guards at the door just stepped aside and let him go, because everyone in that room already understood something that took me a long time to fully accept myself. They were not afraid of the knife I had caught. They were afraid of what I represented. My name is Ethan Cole, and 6 months before that moment, I had been sitting in a small rented room on a mining station, wondering how I was going to pay for my next meal. I was a soldier once, a long time ago, back when Earth still had wars of its own kind. After that ended, I drifted through the wider galaxy doing odd jobs, mostly protection work for merchants who could not afford proper security. Nothing glamorous, nothing that made headlines. Then an offer came through my agent that changed everything. A queen wanted a human bodyguard, not because she thought I could outfight her strongest warriors. She had warriors far stronger than me, built by nature for exactly that purpose, with armored skin and reflexes bred over thousands of generations. What she wanted was something else entirely. She wanted a reputation standing behind her chair. Her name was Queen Vestharal, ruler of a trading dynasty called the Ashgrove Line, and she controlled one of the busiest star hubs in that region of space. Her court was beautiful and dangerous in equal measure, filled with silk banners and quiet threats hidden behind polite words. She had inherited her throne young, after her mother was poisoned during a diplomatic dinner, and since then, she had survived 17 separate attempts on her life. 4 of her previous bodyguards had died protecting her. All 4 had been members of a warrior species called the Kryn, bred and trained since birth, for exactly this kind of work. When I arrived at her palace, nobody in her court expected much from me. I stood there in the entrance hall, an ordinary-looking man with tired eyes and plain clothes, surrounded by beings twice my height with natural armor plating and claws that could tear through steel. Someone actually laughed when they saw me. I did not blame them. I would have laughed too, if I had not known what I knew. The queen herself did not laugh. She walked around me slowly, studying me the way someone studies a rare object in a museum, and then she asked me one question through her translator. Why should I trust my life to a creature with no natural weapons at all? I told her the truth. I said I was not there because I could outfight anyone who came for her. I was there because of what happened to the last people who tried to hurt someone, protected by a human, 2 centuries ago, back when my species first stepped onto the galactic stage, during a war involving a spreading hive of hostile creatures that had already consumed 2 entire star systems before we arrived. I told her that humans were asked to help because nobody else could stop what was happening fast enough. I told her that we did, and that afterward, we chose to stop rather than continue expanding our reach, and that this choice, more than the war itself, was the reason species across the galaxy still hesitated before testing us. She listened carefully, then made a small sound that I later learned was her equivalent of quiet respect. I stayed. She was paying more than I had ever earned in my life, but that was not why I remained past the first contract. I remained because underneath all her sharp political instincts, she was surprisingly kind to her staff, curious about places she would never visit, and lonely in a way that only people carrying enormous responsibility usually are. I found myself standing near her, not out of obligation, but because I actually respected her. The first real test came only 2 weeks into my contract. We were walking through a public marketplace beneath her palace, a wide-open bazaar filled with traders from a dozen different worlds, when I noticed a figure moving against the flow of the crowd. Everyone else was walking one direction, toward a merchant selling rare crystal fruit, but this one figure was moving steadily against that current, weaving carefully, eyes fixed on the queen. I stepped half a pace to my left, placing myself directly between them and her, and I simply watched him approach. He was a Ethic, a species known for their extremely fast reflexes, and their skill with thrown blades. He carried himself like someone who had done this kind of work many times before, calm, controlled, confident. He got within 11 paces of us before he finally looked directly at me. I did not reach for a weapon. I did not shift into any kind of fighting stance. I simply turned my head and looked back at him, the way you might look at someone who had wandered accidentally into the wrong room. He stopped walking. For 3 long seconds, nobody in that marketplace moved. Then he turned around and walked away, quickly, weaving back through the crowd until he disappeared entirely. Palace security caught him near the outer gates a short while later. Under questioning, he said something that the guards repeated to me afterward with clear amusement in their voices. He said he looked into my eyes and suddenly understood, without any doubt at all, that continuing forward would end very badly for him, and he did not want to find out exactly how. I want to be honest about that moment, because the story that spread afterward made it sound far more dramatic than it actually was. I had not done anything special. I was tired that day, thinking about what I wanted for dinner, barely paying attention to my own expression. But it did not matter what I actually felt inside. What mattered was what he saw, and what he believed that meant. Word of that encounter spread through the trading circles within days. Every version of the story grew a little larger in the retelling, the way rumors always do, until by the time it reached rival courts 3 star systems away, I had apparently stared down an entire squad of hired killers single-handedly. I let people believe what they wanted. It made my job considerably easier. The second serious attempt came about a month later, and this one was far more clever than the first. 2 figures arrived at the palace kitchens, claiming to be new staff, sent by a trusted supplier the Queen's household had used for years. Their paperwork was flawless. Their manner was calm and professional. Nobody questioned them, because nobody had any reason to. They were Dralu, a species capable of altering their appearance to blend in almost anywhere, and they were very good at their work. I noticed something wrong almost by accident. I was walking past the kitchen entrance on my usual patrol route when I saw one of the new staff members adjusting a kitchen knife before placing it back in its holder. The way they gripped it was wrong. Not clumsy exactly, but tense. Holding it the way someone holds a tool they have trained with extensively in theory, but never actually used against something that could fight back. I stopped and watched a little longer. The second staff member kept glancing toward the corridor that led to the Queen's private chambers, far more often than any ordinary kitchen worker would need to. I moved closer, casually, the way someone might move if they were simply curious about the meal preparation. When I was close enough, I asked a simple question about where they had trained. The first one answered smoothly. The second one hesitated, for just a fraction of a second too long before repeating almost the exact same answer. That hesitation was all I needed. I did not cause a scene. I quietly signaled palace security, and within minutes, both individuals were taken into custody, without any injury to anyone involved. Under close questioning, it was confirmed they had been sent by a rival trading house that had grown tired of losing contracts to the Queen's dynasty. I did not want them harmed, and I made that clear to security. Instead, I had them sent back to whoever hired them, along with a short written message. The message simply said that sending people who had never actually tested their skills in real conditions was not a wise strategy, and that next time, whoever was responsible should consider a different approach entirely, or perhaps no approach at all. That message apparently spread even faster than the story of the marketplace encounter. Rival trading houses began quietly withdrawing their support for further attempts, not because they suddenly respected the Queen more, but because being associated with a failed and clumsily executed attempt against someone protected by a human had become deeply embarrassing within their circles. Reputation, I was learning, could travel faster and hit harder than any weapon. Over the following months, I settled into a strange rhythm of life inside the palace. I spent my mornings walking the perimeter of the Queen's private wing, checking entry points, speaking quietly with the palace guards about anything unusual they had noticed. In the afternoons, I stood a half step behind the Queen's left shoulder during her audiences with traders, diplomats, and occasionally rival nobles who came seeking favorable terms. I learned quite a lot about her during those long afternoons. She had taken the throne at a young age after her mother's death, thrown into leadership before she felt ready for it, forced to learn quickly, or lose everything her family had built. She carried that weight visibly sometimes, in small ways, a slight pause before speaking, a careful measuring of every word before it left her. But she never let her guard down in front of her court. Only occasionally, in quieter moments when it was just the two of us, did she allow herself to ask questions that revealed a different side of her entirely. She asked me once what Earth looked like from space. She asked whether humans still fought each other the way old historical records suggested, or whether that had truly changed. She asked why my species chose to stop expanding after proving how effective we could be during that ancient conflict with the hive that consumed entire systems. I told her the truth as best I understood it. We stopped because continuing would have made us exactly the kind of threat everyone originally feared we might become, and somewhere along the way, enough of us decided that being feared and respected was not worth becoming something we would not recognize afterward. She sat with that answer for a long moment, turning her dark eyes toward the window that overlooked her trading hub, and said quietly that she wished more of her own advisors thought that carefully about power. By the 4th month of my contract, something noticeably different began happening. The direct attempts stopped almost entirely. This did not mean threats against her disappeared. If anything, the bounty placed on her life by rival houses had actually grown larger, because eliminating someone now protected by a human carried a certain prestige within criminal circles, a kind of proof that whoever managed it was exceptionally skilled or exceptionally brave. Yet despite that growing reward, almost nobody stepped forward to attempt collecting it. I asked her about this directly one evening, over a cup of the strange fermented tea her household regularly served, a drink that tasted faintly of burnt copper mixed with something sweet. She considered the question carefully before answering. She explained that hiring someone to remove her now meant hiring someone willing to face me first, and that my species had built a very particular kind of reputation over the last 2 centuries. She said humans were known throughout many trading circles, not simply for winning fights when forced into them, but for what happened afterward to whoever started the conflict in the first place. Entire trading houses had quietly collapsed after targeting individuals protected by humans, their supply routes disrupted, their alliances mysteriously falling apart, their reputations destroyed in ways that seemed to unfold with quiet, patient inevitability, rather than open confrontation. Nobody wanted to become the next story told as a warning to others, she said. I did not correct her, though the full truth was smaller and stranger than the legend that had grown around it. I was not some unstoppable force sent to punish anyone who challenged me. I was simply a man who stayed calm under pressure, who noticed small details others missed, and who happened to belong to a species that had once demonstrated, briefly and unforgettably, exactly how far it could go if truly provoked, and then chosen restraint afterward instead. That particular combination, ability paired with deliberate restraint, and a well-documented history that nobody wanted to test personally, turned out to be far more powerful than any single skill I actually possessed. The most memorable moment of my entire contract came 6 months in, during a peace summit hosted by the Queen between 3 trading dynasties that had been quietly feuding over shipping routes for years. Representatives from all 3 houses gathered in her grand hall, each bringing their own guards, their own advisors, their own carefully guarded ambitions. I stood behind the Queen's throne throughout the entire negotiation, hands folded, saying nothing, watching the room the way I always did. I noticed something interesting as the hours passed. Every representative, from every rival house, made a clear effort to avoid looking directly at me. Not out of disrespect, but out of something closer to careful caution, the same way someone avoids looking directly at a very bright light, unwilling to draw unnecessary attention toward themselves. At one point, negotiations grew tense. One of the representatives, a sharp-tongued trader from a rival house, raised his voice and made a pointed threat regarding shipping rights along a contested route. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how the Queen would respond, and whether the tension might escalate further. She simply leaned back slightly in her throne, so subtly that only I would have noticed the movement, and asked quietly whether I found the negotiations comfortable so far. I told her I found them very comfortable indeed. That was all it took. The representative who had raised his voice suddenly softened his tone considerably, choosing his next words far more carefully. And by the end of that long session, all three trading houses had reached an agreement that favored the Queen's dynasty more than any of them had originally intended to allow. Nobody drew a weapon that entire summit. Nobody raised their voice again after that moment. The negotiations that followed proceeded calmly, efficiently, almost politely, all because of a single sentence spoken quietly between two people who trusted each other completely. I had not done anything at all during that exchange. I simply stood where I always stood, said what I always said, and let everyone else in that room draw their own conclusions. That, I came to understand, was rather the entire point of my role there. As my contract stretched further, the palace itself began to feel less like a job and more like a place I genuinely belonged. The guards who once eyed me with polite skepticism now greeted me warmly each morning. The kitchen staff saved me small portions of dishes they thought I might enjoy trying. Even members of the Queen's court, who had once laughed quietly at the idea of an ordinary-looking human protecting their ruler, now nodded respectfully whenever I passed through the halls. Queen Vesterol herself changed too, in small but noticeable ways. She walked through her own palace, with a little more ease now, spoke with slightly less caution during private conversations, allowed herself brief moments of genuine laughter that I had rarely seen during those first difficult weeks. The constant weight of watching for danger everywhere had lifted from her shoulders, at least partially, and something close to trust had grown quietly between us in its place. Late one evening, as the palace settled into its familiar nighttime quiet, she found me standing near the tall windows overlooking her trading hub, watching distant ships drift slowly between docking stations, like tiny points of light against the darkness. She asked me, almost gently, whether I ever grew tired of this life, standing quietly in the background while others made history around me. I told her the truth. I said that some of the most important work in the galaxy was never loud, never dramatic, never remembered in grand stories told afterward. Sometimes the most important work was simply standing quietly in the right place, at the right moment, making sure nothing terrible ever needed to happen at all. She considered that answer for a long moment, then turned back toward the window, watching those distant lights alongside me in comfortable silence. Somewhere out there, I knew, rival houses were still calculating whether challenging her was worth the risk. Somewhere out there, ambitious traders were still weighing rumors against reality, wondering whether the stories about humans like me were truly accurate or simply exaggerated legend grown too large over time. I did not need them to know the difference. I only needed them to keep wondering. And as long as they kept wondering, quietly, carefully, from a respectful distance, the Queen I had come to genuinely care about would remain exactly where she belonged, safe upon her throne, ruling her people with the same quiet strength she had shown me from the very first day we met. That, in the end, was worth far more than any contract could ever pay.